My name is Kelsey Morgan. I'm 31 years old, and until that morning, I still believed family meant something you could lean on when things fell apart. I was standing at the front door when it happened. No warning, no buildup, just a sudden shift in the air that told me I wasn't welcome anymore. My bag hit the floor first, then another. Clothes followed, landing in a messy pile at my feet like they'd been waiting for this moment. She didn't hesitate. She spat on the ground near the steps and screamed, "You're a worthless leech. Nobody needs you." I didn't yell back. I didn't defend myself. I didn't remind her why I was there or what I'd already given up. I just stood still, feeling that strange calm you get when something finally breaks so cleanly that there's nothing left to argue over. I picked up my laptop bag. That was the only thing I carried with me. Everything else stayed behind, including the version of myself that still thought this was temporary. I walked away without looking back. Not because I was strong, but because I was done. Done explaining. Done justifying. Done believing silence would somehow protect me. What they didn't know, what no one standing on that porch could have guessed, was that walking out didn't end anything. It started a countdown. 5 days later, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. My inbox filled up faster than I could open it. Subject lines stacked on top of each other. Missed calls, follow-ups, panic leaking through every sentence. They needed me back, desperately. And by then, it was already too late. Before I tell you what he said, and what happened after I walked out, tell me, what time is it for you right now, and where are you watching from? I'm curious to see how far this story will travel. By the time everything collapsed, I had almost forgotten how simple the beginning looked. Just one bank transfer I convinced myself was harmless. About 3 months before I left, I was working as a project coordinator for a logistics company in Raleigh. The job was repetitive but steady. My rent and car payment cleared each month, and a modest emergency fund sat in my savings account. It was not much, yet it felt like proof I had finally reached some kind of stability. One evening, my older sister, Brooke Morgan, called overflowing with good news. She and her husband had found a rental house near the base in Fayetteville that she said was perfect for her cooking business. The landlord needed a decision quickly, and the deposit was more than they had ready. As she talked about counter space and delivery routes, I opened my banking app and looked at the balance that represented almost every extra dollar I had. I typed "loan for deposit" into the memo line before I hit send. Writing that word made it feel like a clear agreement instead of a vague family favor. Brooke texted a stream of gratitude and said they would pay me back monthly once they settled in. Her husband, Adam Pierce, followed with a screenshot of a neat budget that included a line labeled "repayment to me." I treated that image like a kind of promise, even though it was only pixels on my phone. A few weeks later, the company announced layoffs in a short video meeting. My role was on the list. Severance would cover maybe 2 months of expenses if nothing else went wrong. Overnight, my apartment in Raleigh shifted from symbol of independence to a bill I was not sure I could keep up with. I spent evenings at my kitchen table trying to stretch numbers that did not really stretch. While I was still revising spreadsheets and canceling small subscriptions, Brooke called again. This time, her tone was measured. She said it made no sense for me to burn through savings paying full rent alone when they now had a spare bedroom. If I moved in and paid them a smaller amount each month, I could protect what I had left and focus on finding new work. She framed it as balance. I had helped them secure the house. Now they would help me stay afloat. On paper, the plan looked practical. If I paid $800 a month, I could keep my car and phone, avoid missing payments on other obligations, and buy myself time to search for another job. Their utilities and internet were already in place, so I would not have to juggle multiple accounts. I told myself it was a short detour, not a step backward, and that once I was working again, we would formalize everything, including repayment. I gave notice, sold the furniture I could not fit into my car, and packed the rest into plastic bins. The drive to Fayetteville took only a couple of hours, but it felt longer. When I carried my boxes into their house, my role began to form almost immediately. Brooke was running a small meal prep service from the kitchen, cooking in batches for military families who wanted ready-to-heat dinners after long shifts. But her system for handling orders was a mess. I offered to bring order to the chaos because structure is the one thing I know how to build. I upgraded their internet plan so online orders would not drop. I created a simple booking page with time slots, linked it to an online payment processor, and routed confirmations through an email account I managed. We never put anything in writing, yet there was an understanding. They would cook and deliver. I would manage logins, billing profiles, and customer messages, and once income became steady, they would start regular repayments. The first month passed without open conflict, but certain details tugged at me. No one used the word loan anymore. My monthly cash payment disappeared into a kitchen jar without labels, and every major account stayed under my name because my card was attached. Each time uneasiness surfaced, I told myself we would straighten it out later and push the feeling aside. At the start, Brooke asked if I wanted coffee when she brewed a pot. She would slide a mug toward me with a quick smile before turning back to meal prep. Then the mug stopped appearing. The pot stayed on the back burner with 2 cups measured out, and I learned to pour my own after she left the kitchen. It was not cruel, just deliberate. Conversation followed the same pattern. In the first weeks, we lingered around the island at night, talking about customers, recipes, and the houses we used to point at from the back seat as kids. Those nights faded. Brooke kept her AirPods in while she cooked, nodding along to something only she could hear. And if I walked in midway through a story, she would close it with a vague, "Yeah, anyway," and change the subject. Adam's tone hardened faster. Little comments dropped into the air, never addressed directly to me. If the light bill came in higher than expected, he would remark that feeding an extra adult was not free. When a batch of orders took longer to process because I was adjusting the scheduling tool, he muttered about people who overcomplicate simple things. None of it was enough to start a fight, but each remark sat on my chest longer than it should have. Money, which we had tried to wrap in promises, quietly slid off the table. The word loan vanished from their vocabulary. My monthly $800 went straight into a jar by the fridge with loose receipts and grocery cash. Whenever I asked if they preferred a transfer so there would be a record, Brooke brushed it off and said she would sort it at some point. That point never appeared. One night, I came home from a failed interview in Raleigh, changed out of my blazer, and paused at the top of the stairs. Brooke and Adam were in the kitchen below, speaking low, but the vent carried their voices. Brooke said she had expected me to be gone by now. Adam replied that I would hold on to the room because I had nowhere else to go, and that they were not going to hand back the deposit just so I could walk away. In his version, I was lucky to have a roof, and mention of repayment was an inconvenience. The words landed harder than any shout. I stood there in my socks, hand resting against the wall, while the picture in my head shifted. I had told myself they were overwhelmed and disorganized. Now I heard something sharper under the frustration. Intent. Old professional habits took over. The next morning, before they woke up, I forwarded key text threads to a private email account and exported the transaction history from my banking app as a backup file. Screenshots could disappear with a lost phone. Files tucked in cloud storage were harder to erase. I just knew I needed proof that I had not imagined the promises. A few days later, while reorganizing the hall closet to make space for more meal prep containers, I found a slim folder sticking out from under a stack of marketing flyers. It held the small business internet agreement Brooke had signed when they upgraded service for the ordering system. The first page listed the account owner as the business name she used with the Fayetteville address. The second page stopped my breath for a moment. My own name appeared above a signature line labeled Responsible Party, followed by a version of my signature that looked almost right until I focused on the angle of the letters. The date matched a morning I had spent in Raleigh, turning in my badge at work, nowhere near their living room. I set the papers back in order and pulled up email on my phone, searching for any message about the agreement. Nothing. No consent form, no digital signature request, no call from the provider. On the final page, a note mentioned late fees and potential collection action directed at the responsible party if the account went unpaid. Until that moment, the situation had been painful and messy. With those pages in my hand, it turned into something else entirely. The next day, I treated the house like a place I was only passing through. Every cupboard and light switch felt different. I moved carefully, noting whose name sat on which envelope, and how often Brooke and Adam's voices dropped when they were in the kitchen without me. Before they woke, I sat at the small desk in my room with the internet agreement open. I read each paragraph slowly, tracing the phrases about responsibility and collection procedures. My name was printed there, as if I had willingly stepped into the role. The signature under it looked almost like mine, just stiff enough to belong to someone copying instead of signing on instinct. I did not trust memory alone, so I took clear photos of every page and uploaded them to a private folder, along with the screenshots of our messages and the bank transfer. I backed that folder up to a second service in case one account locked. It felt paranoid and necessary at the same time. When the customer service line opened, I called from the parking lot of a grocery store down the road. I gave the account number, spelled out my name, and asked what they had on file for identification. The representative hesitated, then explained the notes. Agreement signed in person at a service desk, identity verified with a driver's license. I knew where my license had been on that day. It had been in my wallet in Raleigh, clipped behind my company badge. The representative could not give legal advice, but she did say one thing clearly. As far as their system was concerned, I was the one they would contact if the bill went unpaid. The wording was neutral. The implication was not. I hung up and sat in my car until the urge to throw up receded. Back at the house, Brooke was chopping vegetables for a new menu. Adam sat at the table scrolling through his phone, a stack of unopened mail beside him. I told them the provider had my name listed as the responsible party and that I had never agreed to that. Adam shrugged without looking up. Brooke said the person at the store must have made a mistake and that I was overreacting. Neither asked to see the contract. The conversation slid sideways almost immediately. Questions about the account turned into comments about how stressed they were, how much pressure the business was under, how much time they had invested in helping me land on my feet. I watched their faces as they spoke, trying to decide whether this was denial or calculation. The longer they talked, the more it sounded like they had rehearsed this story for themselves, that I owed them gratitude, not the other way around, and that anything written on paper could be bent to fit that narrative. That afternoon, I started moving my important things into one place. I gathered my passport, social security card, remaining bank statements, and work references into a single folder. I slid it into my backpack beside my laptop instead of leaving pieces scattered in drawers. From the outside, it looked like I was simply tidying my room. In reality, I was making sure I could leave with what mattered in one trip. I also made a quiet list of what I was willing to lose. The cheap dresser could stay. The extra clothes from college could stay. Dishes and blankets I had brought were not worth a fight. The only things that felt non-negotiable were the records that proved my version of events and the tools I needed to work again. In the evenings, I searched job listings and short-term rentals from the corner of the couch, while Brooke watched cooking shows. I bookmarked postings in other cities without letting myself imagine any one of them too clearly. Kevin checked in by text, asking how things were going. I erased 3 drafts before sending the version that felt safest. Still looking, still here. By the end of that week, my life in the house fit into 2 bags and a folder I kept within reach. I did not announce what I was doing. I just stopped making myself smaller to fit the version of me they had built in their heads. The breaking point came on an ordinary weekday morning. I woke before my alarm, listening to cabinets open downstairs and a pan hit the stovetop. Nothing sounded different, but the tightness in my chest did. When I stepped into the kitchen, Brooke was already in leggings and an oversized sweatshirt, moving between counter and stove with quick, precise motions. Containers for orders lined the island. She brushed past me without a word, as if I were part of the wall. I poured coffee, took a slice of bread, and kept to one corner. Adam wandered in barefoot, phone in hand. He flipped through the mail until he found the utility bill and dropped it onto the table. "This is higher again," he said at the paper. "Lights, Wi-Fi, everything running all day. Nothing here is free." Brooke's shoulders tightened. She set a pan down harder than she needed to. The air shifted toward accusation. I said, as evenly as I could, that I had been paying $800 every month and that we still needed to correct the account with my name on it before late fees touched my credit. I mentioned the contract I had found and the fact that I had never signed it. Brooke finally looked at me. She said I was blowing a clerical issue out of proportion and that if living there made me this unhappy, no one was forcing me to stay. There was nothing soft in her voice. It sounded like a landlord speaking to a tenant. Adam added that they had opened their home when I lost my job, that they were carrying the rent and the stress of the business, and that bringing up the deposit made me sound ungrateful. The word ungrateful rubbed against every screenshot and transfer note I had stored. Something in me went quiet. In their version, I realized I was already the problem. I set my mug in the sink, rinsed it, and told them I would not stay tied to an account I had never agreed to, and would not accept being treated like a burden. They would need to call the provider themselves and put their own names where mine appeared. The argument jumped from there. Brooke's voice climbed, fast and sharp, every sentence about how much pressure she was under and how my presence disrupted her routine. Adam folded his arms and started listing small grievances. Long showers, laundry cycles, space in the fridge. I did not raise my voice. I did not rehash the loan or repeat details. I said that if this was how they felt, I would not stand in their way. Brooke moved first. She walked down the hall, flung open the closet in my room, and grabbed my bags. Clothes tumbled across the entry. Shoes bounced down the front steps. By the time I reached the doorway, a scattered pile of my things lay on the concrete. Brooke stood in the open frame, breathing hard. She called me a leech, said nobody needed me, and told me I could leave if I did not like the arrangement. The words did not break me. They organized everything. I walked past her, picked up my laptop bag and the folder of documents I had prepared, and carried them to my car. Everything else could stay. From the driver's seat, I texted Kevin and asked if his offer for a couch still stood. His reply came almost immediately with his address near the base and a simple instruction to come over. An hour later, my 2 bags and that folder were stacked in the corner of his small living room. He pressed a spare key into my hand and did not ask for details. That night, I turned my phone face down on the coffee table and switched off notifications. Messages arrived. At first, they were short demands for keys, logins, and access. Then they stretched into paragraphs about everything they had supposedly done for me and what I owed them. I created an email folder with Brooke's name on it and dragged each new message there without answering. By the 5th morning, I opened my inbox and saw 50 unread emails waiting, all tied to the house I had just left and the systems they no longer controlled. The next step started on a quiet morning when Kevin had already left for work, and the apartment felt borrowed but safe. When I opened my email, subject lines stacked in a messy column. Urgent. Call me now. This is on you. Some were from Brooke's account, others from a shared address for orders. I scrolled without answering. Anger filled the first dozen. The rest sounded like panic. Customers were not getting confirmations. Payments were hanging in limbo. Delivery schedules had fallen apart. Underneath the complaints, Brooke repeated one demand in different words. She needed me to reconnect the systems, turn subscriptions back on, and clean up the mess before anybody outside the family saw how disorganized things had become. Every sentence leaned on the idea that I was responsible, that walking away had broken something that supposedly belonged to all of us equally. I read each paragraph with the contract in mind. The agreement did not mention shared responsibility. It named one party, and on paper, that party was me. Instead of replying, I searched for the nearest branch of the bank that had handled my transfer. That afternoon, I sat across from a woman in a navy blazer with a badge that said Tanya Reed and explained that I needed help documenting a loan. Tanya asked for dates, amounts, and any written promises tied to the transfer. I slid my folder across the desk. The bank statement with a line marked loan for deposit, the budget Adam had sent, the texts where Brooke talked about monthly repayments. She printed a copy of the statement with an official note confirming the transfer and the memo line. The bank, she said, could not enforce a private agreement, but clear records mattered if the situation reached a courtroom. When I mentioned the internet contract and the signature, she grew more serious. Identity verification, she said carefully, was not a small detail. If a provider claimed to have checked documentation they had never actually seen, there were channels to question that. Walking out of the branch, I felt something I had not felt since the layoff. The sense that the facts were lined up beside me. That evening, Uncle Douglas Hart called. He had heard pieces of the story from Brooke and wanted to understand why his niece had supposedly walked out and wrecked a business that was starting to work. I agreed to meet him at a diner off the highway between Fayetteville and Raleigh. We sat in a booth with coffee neither of us finished. I did not dramatize or list every slight. I opened my folder and showed him the transfer, the messages about repayment, the photos of the contract with my forged signature. I described once how it felt to hear my sister talk about me as a problem to be managed. He read everything slowly. His jaw tightened at the signature. When he looked up, his expression had shifted from concern to something sharper. He did not call my sister a liar. He also did not call me mistaken. He said families handled their conflicts better when everybody sat in the same room with the same information. On his suggestion, we set a time for what he called a conversation, not a confrontation. Brooke and Adam agreed to come if it meant clearing the air. I did not answer their messages directly. I let Douglas handle the details and kept my replies short. Meanwhile, the consequences I had stepped back from started landing where they belonged. A regular customer reached out to the address on the ordering page, and then, when no one replied, tracked down my personal email from an old confirmation. She was polite, but firm. Orders had been missed. Payments had not been refunded. She was thinking about reporting the business to the landlord and to a consumer agency if she did not hear a plan to make things right. I did not speak for Brooke or Adam. I forwarded the message and asked them to address it directly. Then I filed a copy next to the rest of my records. By the end of that week, the question had changed. It was no longer about whether my sister thought I was ungrateful. It was about whose name sat on documents, who carried risk, and who had been using trust as cover. Day we finally sat in the same room, felt less like a talk and more like closing a file. Douglas booked a small community room behind his church. He sat beside me at a folding table with my folder in front of us. We had already gone through every document together. Now they were for my sister and her husband to see, not for him. Brooke and Adam arrived a little late and sat across from us. She set her bag down and folded her arms without looking at me. He placed his phone on the table, screen face up, as if he might need to check out at any second. The air conditioner hummed louder than any of us. Douglas cleared his throat and said we were there to look at actions and records, not old arguments. No one was being judged as a good or bad person that morning, he added, but there could be real consequences if things stayed the same. Then he turned my way and told me to put everything on the table once, clearly, and let it stand. I opened the folder and laid out the first pages. The statement showing money leaving my savings. The memo describing it as a loan. Printed messages where Brooke talked about paying me back each month. I did not raise my voice or explain the context. Dates and amounts spoke clearly enough. Brooke glanced at the papers and said she had always thought of what I sent as help, not debt. Adam muttered that some people like to keep score. I let both sentences hang in the air. The paperwork on the table made it obvious this was more than a vague favor someone could shrug off when it stopped being convenient. Next, I set down the copies of the service contract. My name in the box for responsible party. A signature that looked like mine at a glance, and wrong when you studied the strokes. The date from the morning I had been in Raleigh turning in my badge. Douglas read the liability paragraph slowly, then asked Brooke how my name had ended up there. She blamed a clerical error and said the clerk must have reused old information. Nothing in the agreement supported that story. It showed a single in-person signing checked against identification that had never left my wallet. I did not argue with her explanation. I just said I would not carry legal or financial responsibility for any of their accounts, and that, from that day on, anything about repayment or contracts would go through my attorney instead of my inbox. Adam finally looked straight at me and asked if I really wanted to pull family into court over what he called confusion. I thought of the porch, my clothes on the concrete, that word Leech hanging in the air, and told him I wanted to protect myself. If that meant certain relationships did not survive, then they had already ended the day my name went on papers I never saw. There was no shouting. Douglas closed the folder, said he had heard enough, and walked us to the door. We left without hugging or promising to talk later. I carried my records back to Kevin's apartment and slid them into my bag. They felt less like proof of what had happened to me, and more like tools to keep it from happening again. After that, everything moved in quiet, practical steps. My attorney sent a demand letter with a simple schedule for paying back what I had transferred. When Brooke and Adam ignored it, he filed in small claims court. They settled before the hearing, signing an agreement that put the amount in writing and barred them from contacting me directly. If they missed payments, the judgment would allow stronger collection than reminders and guilt. The service provider finished its review and removed my name from the account. Any balance or calls would follow Brooke's business, not me. The landlord, tired of traffic and complaints, chose not to renew their lease when the term ended. They moved to a smaller place farther from the base. I heard a brief version of that from a cousin and decided I did not need more detail. I stayed on Kevin's couch just long enough to sign a lease for a small studio back in Raleigh. On move-in day, he helped carry 2 bags and 1 box of documents up a narrow staircase, wished me luck, and drove home. No lecture about favors, no list of what I owed him. Just a wave at the door. Months later, the final repayment appeared in my account. My attorney confirmed the agreement was complete. That afternoon, I blocked every phone number and email address that could reach me from their side of the family. There was no last call, no goodbye message, no one-line apology, just a clear line that would stay where I had drawn it. Telling this now, I do not feel triumphant. I feel steady. I learned that boundaries do not break real family. They reveal who only felt close as long as you were paying the price. I learned that keeping records is not paranoia when money and trust are involved. It is how you stay honest when other people rewrite the past. Most of all, I learned that walking away is not the same as giving up. Sometimes it is the first honest thing you do after years of shrinking yourself to keep other people comfortable. If any part of this sounded close to home, I hope you take it as permission to protect yourself sooner than I did. Ask for things in writing. Notice what people do with your generosity. And when the cost of staying keeps climbing, remember you are not a leech for saying, enough. Thank you for staying with my story. If it gave you something to think about, you can share it, leave a comment, or tell me where you are listening from. Either way, I hope you carry one thing when this video ends. You are not here to be used up so someone else can feel comfortable.